Hey, friends. It's a week after Easter, and I get to talk about one of my favorite Bible stories that takes place about a week after Easter, and that's the story about Thomas. So, as you remember, on Easter Sunday, Resurrection Sunday, a week ago, Jesus comes back to life, and that evening he manifests himself to his disciples in the upper room. This is at the end of John's Gospel, and they get to see him, they get to touch him. There's 10 of them present at the time, and it tells us that Thomas wasn't there. And so Jesus disappears again, and then Thomas shows up, and the disciples are all like, "We've seen the Lord." And Thomas says, he's called Doubting Thomas. He says, "Unless I see him myself and put my hand in the wounds and touch the place where the nails went in his hands, I won't believe." Okay? So then this is the thing you might miss, which is really quite funny, is that it's 8 days later before Jesus shows up again to reveal himself to Thomas. 8 days. 8 days of the disciples, 10 of them saying to Thomas, "Thomas, we've seen the Lord. We really have seen the Lord. We touched him. We saw him. He's alive." And Thomas for 8 days saying, "Unless I see it myself, I won't believe. I won't believe." And he gets this nickname, Doubting Thomas. And one of my teachers used to say this, and I think it's right. I think that gives him a bad rap. I don't think that Thomas is a bad guy. I don't think his doubts are a problem. I think he asks good questions. And ultimately, he gets really good answers. This is actually one of the icons I really like is here on that 8th day afterwards. Jesus shows up again in the upper room, and here's Thomas getting the opportunity to put his finger in the wound of Jesus. And what I like about this picture is that he actually does put his finger there to test and see what's really happened. I like this image. I keep it. You often keep it in my office. So what's interesting about this? Thomas is there a week later. Probably tomorrow night would be the 8th day. But he's a week later. He gets to see Jesus, and he says, "My Lord and my God." And Jesus says, "Blessed are you because you've seen and believed. Blessed more are those who have not seen and yet believed." And here is something interesting pops in. Here's something interesting. And maybe you've not seen this before. Thomas, like most of the disciples, has a nickname. He's called Thomas, called Didymus. Thomas Didymus. And that's probably not his last name. Didymus is a word that means twin. Thomas the twin. So there's a couple things. One, Thomas may actually have been a twin with a twin brother named, I don't know, John or Paul or whatever, walking around in ancient Israel. Or it's just possible, and this is the kind of thing John does sometimes, that Thomas is called a twin, a Didymus, because you and we are Thomas's twins in doubt. See, Thomas doesn't get to see Jesus and is asked to believe and spends 8 whole days trying to be convinced by the disciples this happened until he gets evidence. But we don't get to see Jesus in the flesh. We don't get to stick our hands in his wounds and test him in that way. That's not how things work. But we are twins to Thomas. We get to ask good questions and, by the grace of God, receive good answers. And I think that's one of the great things about John's gospel. John is always inviting us in to see things the way he does, to be participants in the story the way he is. And when in the upper room, when John leans back on Jesus reclining at the table, because they're all laying in kind of a circle, I think part of what John's saying is that you're invited to lean back on Jesus. And instead of thinking that John calls himself the beloved disciple because he's got, I don't know, ego issues or he thinks he's extra special, I think he's inviting you to take his place and be a beloved disciple of Jesus in that way. I think that's partly how we're supposed to read the book of John. And so when it comes to Thomas, we're twins to Thomas. We don't have access, and if we anyway, there's lots of reasons why we don't have access to the physical body of Jesus in the way the disciples did. It's probably good for us that we don't. Instead, we have faith, and we ask good questions, and God in faith gives us, God in response to our faith gives us good answers. So, you maybe are a little bit like Thomas, and you get to be like Thomas. And Thomas isn't a bad guy for his doubts. He's a pretty good guy, and he's a model for us. And maybe that's an encouraging word for you this Sunday, the week after Easter. Blessings, and have a great week.